All right, hey, welcome to another episode on the Peanut Gallery.
Hey, everybody.
We have the usuals with us this morning. Back behind the scenes, we got Patrick and Trevor.
Hello.
Hey, we're here.
Wow.
Sorry.
I was trying to be like Patrick, and then I guess Patrick decided
that's
to be
how
like
today's
me.
gonna
Not
be.
that low. It's
All
not that low.
right, and our guest today is the one and the only David Miller.
Woo!
Is it David?
Dave.
Dave.
Yeah,
Dave.
whatever.
Dave, do you have a cool middle name?
Yeah, I do actually.
What do you got?
Jedediah.
No, you do not.
Are you kidding?
Yes, 100%.
Jedediah.
Jetty.
Jedi, yeah.
We have a real Jedi.
I know.
I love
Setting
it.
up in the cool.
That's just
love
like,
it.
look at the
All
Jedi.
right, so kind of cool reason why you're here, and then we'll jump backwards. But the reason that you're here, because we hadn't actually anticipated on interviewing you, because I actually don't know any of your story. All I know about you is that once when I was in youth, which for those of you guys who don't go to church, youth is like, well, the youth. And we do a bunch of crazy things, and you hang with youth and learn about Jesus and all that
Go
kind
on
of stuff
crazy
together.
camping trips.
And so we went on a crazy camping trip when you and Marianne were probably pretty close to newlyweds, or
Yeah, just about a year in.
just about a year in. And you guys were mushy, but you guys were a lot of fun. I have really, really positive memories of you.
That's
So,
good. That's good
it was-
because we don't. we had a really rough beginning to our marriage. It was really tough. We split up for a bit of time there at the beginning of our marriage. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, there's a lot. We're going all over today.
Yeah.
Because my picture of you, just so you guys know, like just the image of the mushiness that we saw. There was a time where you were allowing, some of the youth girls, they were putting sunblock on your back, and they had inscribed "I love Marianne." Like it was beautiful. You had a tan with your love. It was.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was
it
crazy.
Yeah, I know. And you said you don't remember that, so I could be making it up. But in my memory, it's definitely there. So, but the reason that you're here, going back to before my rabbit trails began, so you were listening last week, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys had actually, Josh was a former neighbor of mine, and I knew nothing of his story.
Really?
Nothing.
Okay.
So I
how
hung out
long?
with-
How long ago were you neighbors?
So I would have been 10, 12, maybe. It was a long time ago. So that's talking 30 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, he lived across the street up from me on Linden Street. And I used to hang out with Jim.
Okay. Yeah. Big Jim.
Yeah, Big Jim.
Muscles Jim.
Yeah, before he was muscles. Yeah.
You were the reason he's muscles, probably.
Maybe.
Oh,
He beat me
that
up
Miller.
sometimes. I don't know.
Okay, so you were listening, you were really impacted, and you called me, and this was one of those phone calls, because our relationship for the last year or two has just been work, kind of, because you work for Bearable Construction, Elmer, and so you guys have been doing stuff here at the church. So I was very curious. I'm like, why are you calling? And so you kind of shared that you had really been impacted by this.
Yeah. First of all, like this peanut gallery is doing some special things, man. I'm really, really excited to see what you guys are doing. And yeah, I was listening to the podcast on the way home from work. I had the phone beside me, laying down, face down on the console. And Josh was telling his story, and he started talking about being fatherless. And it hit me huge. It started to bring some thoughts up in my life that I hadn't thought of for 20, 30 years. And it hit me. I was bawling on the way home from work. I'm like bawling. I get home and my family is there and my mom's there, and I'm like, I got to pull it together so they can't see my weakness.
Come on, Mallory.
My kink in my armor.
Right. Okay, so let's talk. So who are you now? Let's talk a little bit now, and then we'll get into the behinds. Tell me a little bit about who you are now. I said already you work for Bearable. What do you do at Bearable? Who is Bearable? Yeah,
so I do all things project. So project coordinate for Bearable Construction. Having a lot of fun. I got a great employer. I got great guys that I work with. We're doing some special things in the area, building churches,
nice.
Helping churches expand, helping churches do different things. Really excited about it. But most importantly, I'm a dad of 8 kids.
Well done.
Yeah, by the grace of God, man.
8 kids.
8, yeah. Woo! And all the way from 27, and don't quote me on that, it might be 28 by now. It's all the way from 27 down to 4.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm a dad. I got an amazing wife, Marianne, Lavender Mama. She's a big part of my life.
She's Lavender Mama?
Yeah, she's Lavender Mama. Yeah.
Wow.
And
did you call her that?
Yeah, I do actually.
I believe that.
She's my hot lavender mama. Yeah, and so we got the 8 kids. I got the wife working hard, and we're elders at the church in Tilsonburg there, Beacon Bible Chapel.
Yep,
having a lot of good times there too. Got a great church family.
Yeah. I'm sure COVID has been easy up there too. No
Absolutely,
challenges whatsoever,
absolutely.
nothing, no stress.
Don't ask me
piece
about
of
this,
cake.
okay? I don't want to incriminate myself.
All right, so you also used to have long flowing hair before the 8 children, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I had Jerry curls, man.
Jerry curls?
Yeah, totally. Literally had an afro.
Wow. Seriously?
Yeah.
I thought you were joking, but seriously.
No,
okay.
I'm sorry. I'm 100%
There's
serious.
so much I don't know. I am quite excited about what I am going to learn today. All right, so let's go back then. Talk to me about your childhood. What about your story did you feel connected so deeply to Josh's?
So the way I always introduce myself to people that don't know me, if I'm going to introduce myself to a crowd, I always say it this way: I'm the only child of a single mom. And that pretty much wraps up my life in a nutshell. I have a bunch of reasons that a psychiatrist or a shrink or whatever you want to call them would make a lot of money off of me.
Yeah.
but yeah, so that was me. I was the only child of a single mom, and had a lot of unique experiences, I think, because of it.
So did you grow up here? Are you?
Yeah. So I grew up here in Canada. My mom emigrated back in the 60s, 50s, 60s probably would have been.
Okay.
And she worked for Imperial Leaf Tobacco. Started when she was 17. Worked there a long time, 30 years I think it was. There was a lot of stuff that she went through being there.
Yeah.
I was born in 1977, and so the climate was a little bit different for people in her position at that time. But yeah, so I've lived here all my whole life. Grew up in Elmer, went to McGregor, Davenport, East Elgin. I think I still got a T-shirt somewhere. And so yeah, I grew up in the Elmer area. Moved to St. Thomas, got involved with a church there. And
okay, so you talked a couple things, but you talked about unique experiences.
Yeah.
Maybe can I start by asking the question? Why do you introduce yourself that way?
Well, first of all, if you know me a little bit, I'm a little ADHD. Not as much as you guys, but a little ADHD. And
I think all the cool people are, to be honest, but whatever.
But no, I introduce myself that way so that people get a good frame of reference of the kind of the experiences that I've gone through. And so, like, to be an only child means like I get really ticked when the kids take the tools and don't put them back where they belong, right? and so that's a piece of it. And then also too, like, I've always felt the stigma of being without a dad. Just give you a quick shot. Like, so just recently we were installed as elders at our local church, and we got together with a couple the night before our interview process, and he just asked the question, "Where's your dad?" Just like that, right?
Yeah.
And I had to frame an answer like, why is he asking this question?
Yeah.
Like, and it felt. And I don't think he meant this at all, but it felt like he was asking, how did you get to figure out the things that you figured out? And I really realized that. I was like, why would you ask that question? And so all in my life, I've really felt that stigma of, hey, I'm fatherless. I wouldn't say that it kicked in until probably 10 or 12 years old. In that time frame is when it really kicked in that, hey, there's something missing here. Like, there's something going on. And I mean, I'd been involved in the Big Brother program. I had a big brother, Richard Irwin, back when I was like 10 years old. So like I knew that was a component of my life that somebody was trying to fill a gap for me. But yeah, when I was 12 years old, 10 or 12 years old, I remember not being able to sleep. So my Aunt Nancy and Uncle Andrew Weeb, you know Andrew.
Yeah.
They would take care of me while my mom was on the 3-week swing shift, the 3-shift swing. So she'd work 2 weeks on day shift, 2 weeks on afternoon shift, and then 2 weeks on night shift. And so during those times when I needed to be taken care of and I wasn't in school, I'd spend time at my aunt and uncle's house, Nancy and Andrew. And I remember I was probably 10 or 12, and I just could not sleep, and I was just sobbing uncontrollably. And my Aunt Nancy came to me, and she's like, "What's going on?" And she's like, and my answer was like, "I just feel like something's missing." Something's missing in my life. I don't know what it is, and I don't know why, but I have this connection to remembering that, saying to myself, like, I just want to throw a baseball with somebody. And that was huge for me to think about that. And so my Aunt Nancy comes to see me, and she's like, what's going on? And I shared those things with her. And she left the room, and she must have gone to talk to Uncle Andrew, and Uncle Andrew comes out, and he's a truck driver, and he probably wants to sleep, but he comes out and he starts to talk to me, and he's like, I don't know what to do, but I'm here for you, whatever you need. And so, yeah, that was when it kicked in. I think those emotions, that particular event was the event that I realized, hey, something's missing here. Something. I need something.
So where do you jump forward from that? I mean, that's a tough age, period. Kids at that age are not nice to each other. Kids at that, like, there's a lot about those ages that are such a challenge. And I know kids, it's a challenge for all the kids. But how do you navigate something like that? So what was the next while? Like you were saying, your emotions are kicking in.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate the next couple of years in your life?
So if you guys were to see me with curls, I'd love to show you my high school pictures, like grade 9. I look like a normal kid. Like grade 8, 9, I look like a normal kid. And you can just see the progression, the downward progression in my life. Like, got into things I should have never gotten into. I started stealing, just making trouble all over the place. I remember stealing my mom's car.
I don't know why we're smiling. This is terrible.
I remember stealing my mom's car. I remember. Here's a bad story. I don't remember my mom ever spanking me, but I remember I got caught doing something I shouldn't have done in Davenport. Mr. Galinsky sent me home.
Mr. Galinsky. And he sent me home, and my mom picked me up. And so she never really spanked me, but she hurt me really bad. Like not to say, she impacted me really hard with what she said. She made a comment to me like, Dave, I've been working to raise you so that if you ever ran into your dad, that he could say that I did a good job. And that was huge. That hurt me. And it probably pushed me to want to be better. But I didn't. It actually kind of I probably went the other way. And I knew I couldn't meet that standard, so I went the other way. And so I got in a lot of trouble through high school. Meaning I did bad things, but I never got caught. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So looking back now, because a lot of kids are going through this now. Do you remember why? And that's the same question I kind of asked Josh. I'm like, because I know there's a part of it where our brain at that age just isn't fully connected, right? Like
Exactly.
So there's that part, but there's also a question like, do you remember doing some of those things intentionally? Do you remember like, hey, because that hurts, like, and I can see it in your face. So we're a lot of years later, and that pain is still as real today, probably, and maybe more real now because you see the impact of it and you're reliving it. But what do you do in that moment? Do you remember like why, or do you remember like would anything have helped? I mean, that's a big question, but
I really, it's a big philosophical question, but I think it's pretty simple. I think if I would have just been busy, if I would have just had something to do, just put my hands to something, I think I could have done it, and make it interesting for me, make it a challenge for me. I think that's the big thing. That's the big component of it. Really, a lot of the stuff that I got into was to prove that I was cool. First of all, that was one element of it. But then just I was bored. I wanted to do something, and so there's multi components of it. But yeah, it just ended up working out the way that it did. And I never. And I was thinking about this on the way here. I never said, I'm going to steal that car because I don't have a dad. I never. That was never part of the process.
Right.
It was just wanting to try and maybe to say, hey, I want to prove that I'm good enough. Like I might not have this piece in my life, but I got to try and prove that I'm cool. Was
there ever a point where that kind of clicked in though? Like when did that kind of click in that that the impact of your dad not being there is actually affecting some of these behaviors? Or is that just something now when you look back and you kind of see, you're like, oh man, that probably had a factor in it?
No, I think so. I started to act out sexually when I was 15. And I think that's when I started to see some of how I came to be was affecting what I was doing.
Right.
Yeah. So, and not to say that it was a conscious thing. It just happened. Like that's just kind of how I tried to do that thing of saying, hey, I want to try and be cool, and at the same time, I was bored.
Right. That's really interesting, that board thing. And I won't belabor this one, but that's fascinating because I wouldn't have expected that. Because right now, a lot of the messaging is that we're all too busy. We need to do more time doing less. But there's a balance in there. And maybe, I mean, now that you're a dad, is there a part of knowing your own kid? Like, is it because of who you were, or is that just a bit more of a rule of thumb that at that age, get your kids doing something they enjoy doing?
Oh yeah, yeah. So my wife and I, we have a motto like dad buys the food, mom cooks it, the boys clean it up. Like that was kind of how we set it up so that they'd be busy. They'd be busy taking care of stuff, right? And my boys all had a pretty big chore list, and the little ones coming along, they do too, just to keep themselves busy. And
except for the baby, the youngest one never has anything. That's
his chore.
Just ask all the oldest one. just be cute.
Yeah, sit there and be pretty. He'll say that too.
Yeah. So let's jump back a little bit. So the stigma that you face, what was that like for you? So now that you know, obviously dad isn't there, because I've often thought about this when we do youth events, or you do father-daughter things, or those types of events. What was that like experiencing that? And maybe we'll fast forward that, because people are gonna be like, that's a cruel question, Albert. Why do you make? But to come forward to kind of go, because there are a lot of kids living through this. How do you navigate that? How do we help them? And so maybe talking about some of your experience and what you felt like during those times can help us better help those who are going through it now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so if I think about that question, I really think that a big part of me growing up, I'll give you an example. Like, so I don't remember ever going to somebody's house on a social visit. I remember going to people's houses, like my family get-togethers. Aunts and uncles would be over all the time. My mom would get together with her sisters often. But I remember 2 specific times that we actually went to somebody else's house that were not familiar to me, that weren't necessarily blood. And it comes back to the whole idea of how do you even invite a single mom over to your home for a meal?
Right. And that honestly is part of our own challenge. How do you navigate that?
Yeah.
Like, and we've talked about this before. Like, do we make them feel awkward if we want them to come over? Even in the idea of singleness in general.
Yeah.
Because not everybody marries. Not everybody finds somebody or wants somebody. Not everybody's made for that.
That's right.
So how do you navigate some of that? Because I think that's part of the stigma that your mom would have faced. Yeah. And thus, by your mom, then you're facing the same thing she's facing.
Yeah, and I'm going along for the ride.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and so when my mom wasn't able to go to people's houses for visits, or I even remember church was even an awkward thing. And my mom can tell you stories like she'll be walking through the grocery store and she'll say hi to somebody, and like somebody that she worked with in the past or had a connection to through different associations, and the person responds, "I'm married." Like it was like it's that kind of a difficulty being in the position that she was.
Right.
And in our circles, like the immigrated Mennonites, that it's even less of a safe spot.
Right. Because there's a ton of judgment.
Yeah.
The assumptions are huge as to why she doesn't have a husband anymore, why all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they're very rarely positive.
Yeah.
And so then those judgments end up breeding a ton of stigma.
Yeah. And so to tell my story, like when I say I'm the only child of a single mom, my next statement is I never laid eyes on my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Like I never. I know his name, but I never laid eyes on him even as a baby. And so the stigma that came around from my mom because of that was huge. And my grandpa even had a hard time with that.
Right. And a part of that is nobody wants anybody to go through that. So there's a piece of it that's sympathy, but then there's people who are just callous and mean.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that. Is there any other, because you said, I don't want to cut you short on some of the stuff. You said that in unique experiences before.
Yeah, and the unique experiences that I had, like, I'm getting back to that whole piece. Like, I remember going to people's houses like 2 times, and they even had a connection from my mom through family somehow in some way. And so so you asked Josh the question. You had said, how could, if we see a single mom, how could we step in for her? And we always want to program everything. We want to turn everything into a program. And the biggest thing that somebody can do is just say, hey, you want to come over for a meal? Like we got this going on this weekend. You want to come over? Like, I would have loved to have been a part of that. And not only that, my social connections growing up wouldn't have been ones that I had to manufacture. They would have been ones that I was drawn into. Right. And like, for me, all of my relationships were the ones that I went out and said, hey, what's going on? Or I got involved in a different thing. Like, my Uncle Willie took me to a youth group at the Old Colony Church, go figure. But yeah, he took me to an Old Colony Church youth group, and I made a connection there with a few guys that were just awesome, and they became lifelong friends, and we hang out to this day. And so yeah, people just saying, hey, let's do this, or let's try this. Would have been huge in my life.
I have a question, Dave. You mentioned like some of the treatment that you witnessed, like your mom enduring, knowing that she's putting forth this crazy effort.
Yeah, she was huge
to give you the best life possible that she could.
Yeah.
How did people's treatment of your mom, especially people that went to church and said they knew God and they knew God's love, how did that impact your perception of the faith experience as you had people say, hey, you want to come to youth? Like, you know what I mean? Like, hey, we want you to come to the place where people are supposed to treat people differently. Yeah. But what all you've seen is almost a kind of hate towards like the situation of life that happened to your mom.
Great question. I never put the two together. I don't think I ever put the two together. I never did. I mean, I just knew there was guys that are out there that were mean, and that's all I knew. Like, I didn't put the two together that, hey, these guys are actually guys that are going to church. So it was kind of funny. We lived beside. I grew up beside Old Colony like lead singers, like the singers that were at the front of the church, and them not even really taking an interest in me. Like, they had a great opportunity to speak into my life and never did.
Right. So that kind of gets me back to, I was a little bit stunned by the simplicity of your answer. Because you're right. We want everything to be complex. And that's part of why, I mean, we love Jesus and you love Jesus. Part of that is it's just so simple. He's like, look, there's a big book, but if you love God and you love people, you're going to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
And that seems to be the message you're giving. Would there be anything different? And I asked Josh this too, like, how do you navigate? Because so for me, the culture that we live in, everybody judges any adult who takes too much of an interest in a kid. There's a lot of flags there for good reason. Yeah. Good reason. Yeah. How do you navigate some of that where, let's say I come along and I'm just whatever, somebody from the church. What would you say for advice on how do you navigate that? Or is it as simple as just going up to your mom and talking and
treating my mom like a normal human being, like getting like in what makes her tick, like what are the things, and like I think a big thing would have been the women in her life. Just being able to say, hey, why don't you come over for a meal? And we've got so-and-so coming over. Like, why don't you just join us? That would have been a huge part of it. I think I would have been able to make a lot of good connections that way. And I'll share with you a story. So I hung out with Pete and Jake Simons.
Okay.
Pete and Jake Simons. I don't know if you know them at all.
I know Pete. I know who he is.
Yeah. So I hung out with them, and we would spend a lot of time. Every Wednesday, we'd go over and watch 90210. Thursdays were Cheers and Seinfeld and Friends.
Oh yeah.
And so I spent a lot of time at the Simons house, and so I got to meet Dick and Tina Simons, and or Siemens, as some people would say. And so I got to meet Dick and Tina, and they were amazing. Like Dick was just like super cool, super tough. Really never batted an eye at me. You know, they could have said, here's that Miller kid hanging around the house again. Oh, what kind of trouble is he going to cause? But they never did. And they were so they were super to me. But in terms of influences in my life, he was a huge one. Like, and I made that connection through Pete and Jake. Mr. Simons never said to me, hey, you should do things this way, or maybe do this, or ask me about my life. But I used to watch him. I used to watch him like crazy. And I didn't know how much I watched people or watched fatherly figures as much as I did until just recently. So to this day, I was just joking with Pete yesterday. I told him, I'm like, I could probably reenact a lot of your dad's mannerisms because of the way I watched him. Like, I just watched him so much. And so I remember seeing him read his Bible, and I remember seeing him watch action movies. He'd fast forward through all the action scenes, the talking scenes, to get right to the action. He was that kind of guy, right? And so he was amazing in my life. And all I did was just watch him. And I had other men in my life that I just like watch and like learn, like what are they doing? Dick would do this thing where every time we were there, he would come downstairs and he would just check the basement, check everything that was cool. Like, make sure that all the lights were off, make sure the freezer's still running, make sure the furnace is still running. I remember that stuff. That's 30 years ago. And that was a huge impact in my life. And when I do that today, I think of him. And so like to see those people and watch them and learn from them was huge for me. And I think a lot of single kids, kids that don't have dads, they do that. They try and pick up things where they can. And that's just so happened how it worked for me. I shared with, we have family in Alberta, and their dad had passed away a number of years ago, and we just reconnected with them recently, and they're like, what do you remember about my dad? And I was like, let me tell you what I remember about your dad. And then I shared with him a few mannerisms that he had. And I was just thinking about it. I'm crying because realizing how much I watched, how much I tried to pay attention to those things. I was able to reenact exactly what their dad used to do. And they're like, how'd you do that? Like, you even look like him when you do that. I'm like, I watched. Like, I tried to pick up on as much as I could just from hanging out with adults. And so how do you navigate it? Take an active interest in a way that you can. Of course, it's weird that an old guy's going to ask about, hey, how's it going? But like, just to be able to say, hey, like, how can we speak into his life? How can we make avenues for speaking into his life? Yeah.
And when you were saying that, I was thinking of, so we lost Benny here a little while ago, a good friend of ours. And so one of the things, Esther sent us a video a couple of days later, and one of their church guys had come down. So Benny had just bought this tractor. And so he was on the tractor and showing the boys how to run it. But it's a little thing. But I'll guarantee you those boys will never forget that. You lose your dad, but there's these other guys who step in. It's a simple thing. But they don't know how to ride the tractor yet. It was a new tractor. They didn't. Yeah. And so I think, and hearing your story and hearing Josh's and kind of reflecting on a lot of this, like it literally really boils down to people just caring. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in feeling sorry for someone that we actually stop caring for them. Yeah. So I'm sorry that you had, only one parent, and I'm sorry that you don't have a husband, but that doesn't actually lead to anything. I know a couple of weeks ago in church, we were talking about the difference between sympathy and empathy. And I almost feel like a lot of this conversation comes boiling back to that, where people are sympathetic probably towards you. They probably took notice. Even when you were acting out and stuff, I bet you there was people having conversations probably because he doesn't have a dad. But it never led to doing anything. And I think that's part of what I'm picking up from both of you, is that it was all those little things that people did. Reach out, care for me. Like the fact that you guys weren't getting invited over, the fact that you didn't have that. So that's crazy. Like that, if somebody's already struggling with loneliness, to not have that. Wow. No, it's been good. This has been challenging for me.
Yeah, we actually, my wife and I, we talked about this quite a bit on Thursday night after I talked with you. Like there's so many single moms that we see around us, right? We've got friends. We had friends. He died just a couple of years ago, and she's left with 4 or 5 beautiful kids. And there's another woman that we were connected to quite closely, who she's got cancer, and she's got 4 children at home, and her husband's not around. And so there's so many opportunities for us to be able to do work, right? And share the love of Christ with them. Like that's a perfect avenue. I really, so back in 2007, I really got connected with the passage that says, pure and undefiled religion is to take care of the widows and the orphans. And yeah, there's a lot of understanding of what that widow component is. But just to be able to go and spend time with those who can't, we need to advocate and intercede for those who need it, right? Those who have a need, we have the opportunity to be able to advocate and intercede, and we need to take opportunities for it. So like that's a commandment that we should be following,
right? And that's who, in studying the life of Jesus quite a bit, that's who was drawn to him.
Yeah,
they were looking for hope, and they saw in him somebody who authentically cared, and
the down and outers.
So what changed your life? What you said you got into a ton of trouble, and So why did you not go down a much darker path, and how did you get out?
So how did I not go down a darker path? I got to say it's just by the grace of God. I don't know. I really don't know. So a couple of things that happened to me, like mile markers on the road. I met hot girl from Valley Heights. I made her my girlfriend.
Is this going to be your wife? Because if not, it's going to be super awkward. Yeah, okay, all right, fine. All right.
And then made her my girlfriend, made her my wife. And, she actually let me be her husband. I should say it that way. And
Good save. That's much better.
She sat at home going, "You made me? Dude, what?"
She'll be on the podcast next week to correct everything.
That's right. That's exactly right. But so we got married, and she's got some stellar parents. And they really stepped up for me too. Like, and really when I was down and out, coming into being a teenager, I really believe they prayed for me a ton. It's interesting. So I got saved following a girl to church. Wasn't my wife, but I got saved following a girl to church. New Hope Baptist in Tillsonburg. A really zealous youth pastor said, "Dave, you need to get saved." And so he sat down with me, and we prayed. But because the relationship with the girl fizzled out, my discipleship opportunities changed. And so I just said, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm not going to the church anymore. My relationship isn't going to continue on. And so I invoked Christ's life or Christ's name in my life, but never had any way of understanding or doing that kind of stuff. And my Uncle Willie took me to youth, the old colony youth, and I got to learn at least a little bit about the Bible. And so those kinds of things just kind of are mile markers and things that kind of kept me on the path. But yeah, I've we might say that I didn't go down a dark path, but I still did some dark things.
Right.
I still did some dark things and hurt a lot of people.
Right.
And really regret it. So to say that I did go down a dark path, you just don't see that dark path, and it's not as obvious. I acted in a different way.
Right.
And so, I really got connected with a good church and a really cool mentor, Mike Cron's dad. Again, a situation where he didn't say, "Hey, Dave, you should do this," or you should think this way. It was just him being him, and me soaking it up. And we never formalized to say, "Hey, George, you're my uncle, you're my mentor."
Right.
We never formalized that. But really, I watched him and I learned so much from him. Yep.
Well, I have learned a lot from watching your life, and I didn't know any of this. And so watching the way that you've navigated things, this has definitely given me a much deeper respect for for how you've gone through life. And I think, I don't know if this is the right way of putting it, maybe it's unfair, but I think often kids who don't have the parental figures, a lot of other people just kind of assume that they're probably going to be a little messed up and they're not going to do, right? Like there's that same stigma. Yeah. And I feel like the more people I talk to like you, the more I'm like, I hope people are hearing this growing up. Maybe your family isn't as good as you'd like. Maybe you're broken. Maybe your dad isn't there. Your mom isn't there. That doesn't mean that you don't matter. It doesn't mean that you don't have value. It doesn't mean any of these things. It just means these are unique struggles you're going to have to face. And at the beginning of this, when we talked to Josh last week, we talked about the village. And I think your life is there again. And I think even within the context of, all right, so even people who grew up with two parents have struggles. Like Trevor, our tech guy, who's let the camera die. So that's why there's a little bit of an awkward cut. But what I wanted to say before we were blacked out,
so rudely interrupted.
So and it was going to be emotionally. It was going to be no. I feel like kids sometimes believe that they're hopeless.
Yeah.
And when they began, like I'm thinking about that moment when you realized you didn't have a dad.
Yeah.
And then you begin to go, oh man, I'm never going to become a good dad, and I'm not going to become a good husband, and I'm not going to this. And so one of the things I'm really hoping is that as people are listening, they're like, no, there's hope. Like, there's, yes, those circumstances aren't ideal. I'd never want that on anyone.
Yeah. You're going to run into a job that has a great guy that like, don't look for jobs that just have great pay. Look for jobs that have guys that are going to lead you in the right way.
Well, that was the thing with Josh. Surround yourself with the right people.
Yeah.
Put good people in your life. Find good people.
Yeah, that's right.
And for the adults, it's such a challenge to me, and I'll just share with everybody else, but just love. Just the kids that you know are struggling, whether their behavior or whatever it is, just love them the best you can. And you're not going to solve everything in the same way that Andrew and all those guys didn't solve everything for you.
That's right.
But they were little pieces of it. And I think if the village can keep caring, I think we can keep loving on people. And I also think I'd speak to the stigma. You know, my heart goes out to your mom and dealing with that for a lot of years.
My mom's awesome. My mom's awesome.
But she raised a decent kid. Like, we think you're all right.
Right on.
All right, any last words?
She'll be happy to hear that.
Yeah. Any last words? Anything?
No, I appreciate it. Appreciate it, guys. You guys are doing a great work here. Appreciate it a lot.
All right, well, if Trevor doesn't have anything else you want to apologize? No, I'm just kidding. Hey, it's been awesome. We will see you on the next one.